And I am really lucky to be joined here today by Alex Pavesi talking about his second novel, Ink Ribbon Red, which comes out on the 7th of November. Thank you ever so much for joining me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. It's really nice to talk to you.
And just so people know about the book, because I always think it comes better from the person who created it, can you give a summary of the story of Ink Ribbon Red?
Yes. So this is kind of the classic setup of six friends who've known each other since university. They're just turning 30. Every year for one of their birthdays, they go to a house in the countryside and spend the weekend together. It's the year the youngest of them is turning 30, so they're doing this ritual as usual. Um, and they decide to play a parlor game because it's a wet weekend and there's not much to do. The parlor game insists on them picking names out of a hat, put all their names into a hat, pick out two, and that becomes your murderer and your victim. And then you have to write a story where the murderer kills the victim. So basically, they spend the weekend imagining each other murdering each other. Um, and then this game sort of causes tensions to rise, which causes secrets to be revealed. And then maybe they start murdering each other for real, or maybe they don't. And there's a question mark over where the fiction ends and the reality begins. So it's kind of my take on a classic crime fiction setup.
With the almost like a locked room mystery, but not.
Mm. Yeah, I'm a big fan of that kind of book, and it's having a sort of moment right now. And there's a lot
Oh,
of good ones.
absolutely.
Yeah, a lot of good ones being written, and that's what put the idea into my head to sort of have my own attempt at it.
One of the things that I was sent when I was sent the original information about the book was it was inspired by the cast of Friends.
Yes, yeah. So the book is set in the late 90s. I like to set crime novels slightly in the past because then I think the distance you get from setting something in the past makes it a bit easier to be a bit playful with the kind of with the murders themselves.
Because you're looking at it nostalgically as well.
Yeah, yes. There's a kind of a lens, there's a distance there, and the distance adds sort of a distancing effect, I suppose, which makes it kind of slightly easier to take a playful approach to it. Because it's a playful book, but it's also about some dark themes.
Oh, yeah.
So I chose the late 90s because that was kind of that's a period I remember very well. I was 16 in 1999,
I was
and
26.
okay, so you probably remember it well too.
Oh, I
And
remember, going to the Millennium New Year's Eve party. So,
oh
yes.
yeah, yeah, I went to the big fireworks in London for that actually, which is the only time I've ever done that.
I went to a
Um,
nightclub that had only just reopened and their air conditioning broke.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it was a fun time. Obviously, the 90s was the peak of culture in my view. And as soon as I had this idea that I was going to have a group of friends in the late 90s, my mind went to the TV show Friends, which dominated my childhood, my teenage years. I suppose it was obviously huge, as you remember, huge at the time. And I
Yes.
I was a big fan and still am, kind of. Uh, I rewatched it about 5 years ago when it was first put on Netflix, but it holds up pretty well. Some bits more than others. But as soon as I knew I was setting this book in the late 90s and it was a bunch of friends, I thought, okay, the starting point for this, I could try and take some inspiration from the TV show. Um, and one thing, as I say, I've read quite a lot of these books. One thing you do notice is quite often the friends in question don't actually like each other very much. And you sort of think, why are they going on holiday together? It's a bit strange. But so I wanted a dynamic where my friends actually liked each other, but kind of at the same time were quite brutal in sort of making fun of each other and getting on each other's nerves and things. So again, yeah, I thought Friends, the TV show, was a pretty good model for this. So when I was planning the book, I actually, a very, very early version. I mean, this probably won't come across in the finished version. I don't know, but the characters were actually named, Monica, Rachel, Phoebe, Joey, Chandler, and Ross, and
Well, we do still have a Phoebe.
we do still have a Phoebe, although the person that was going to be Phoebe was not that Phoebe. Um, so yeah, I kind of worked out the very basics of the plot with the friends' characters' names still in place, and I did start with their kind of um, personalities to some extent, and then massively changed them as I needed to for the book to work. But there's probably still a kind of shadow of the original inspiration there. Um, yeah, I don't know. I'll leave it to readers to try and work out which character began as which. See if they
My
can do that.
brain's saying that Maya is Phoebe.
Uh, no, she was Rachel actually.
Really?
Mm, yes, because I mean, yeah. When I think of Friends, I think of the earlier seasons more than the later seasons. And in
Yeah.
the earlier seasons, Rachel was kind of detached from reality. She was this spoiled rich kid who was quite shallow in her depiction,
Oh,
and
I'd agree with that 100%.
yeah, and I think Maya has an element of that. Yeah, Phoebe actually. I mean, my controversial opinion about Friends is that I don't really like the character of Phoebe, and I think the show would probably be better without her in it. I think she's just a bit too weird to get it to fit in with the others. So, I mean, the character called Janica was sort of Phoebe to begin with, but they never really had much in common. So that's probably the most tenuous link.
Yeah, Phoebe,
Um,
I mean, Janica seems almost not detached, but she is very, I mean, she's incredibly intelligent, quite clearly.
yeah, yeah. I guess she's kind of the outsider of the group, which is what she has in common with Phoebe, perhaps.
And
Um,
she's the last person to arrive and the last person to get involved in everything, purely because she's been out doing her own thing,
yes,
which
I
I
mean,
found quite interesting about her character.
she's also kind of the substitute for a detective. I mean, there is no detective in this book, but she's the one that works things out, and so she's kind of taking that role of sort of Poirot, turning up halfway through the narrative, or Miss Marple, or whoever it is, and figuring everything out. So, yeah, I mean, that's the reason I held her back until the second, well, not quite the second half, about a third of the way through, she comes into it as a major character. Um, and then she comes into a situation that's quite mysterious to her. She doesn't quite know what's going on, which was another way of sort of presenting a mystery to the reader, because it's helpful if one of the characters is experiencing the same mystery as the reader.
Because she gets elements of exposition from the other characters when she comes into it, because it's like, "Well, what's going on here?" Because
Yeah.
oh, that's the thing. I loved the tension between the characters that was built, obviously, because of this game. Because the game is the thing that sort of brings certain resentments and mysteries and secrets to the surface. And it's almost, I mean, we know that Anatole intended to do that because he's quite a vengeful character in many ways, I think.
Mm.
He's jealous. That comes
Yes.
across from the start, that he's very jealous of the fact that his friends seem to have things together, and he's depending on other people's goodwill in many ways.
Yes. Anatole was a lot of fun to write. I mean, he's very clearly the antagonist from the start. I won't say whether he ends up as the antagonist, but he's sort of the yes, he's the spanner in the works that wants to disrupt things, and he's clearly very unhappy with what his life has been, turning 30. The whole idea of turning 30 comes from this one particular episode of Friends. Speaking of Friends, where all the characters turn 30. It's Rachel's birthday, I think, and they all reminisce on their 30th birthdays. And it's sort of presented as this end of the world apocalyptic disaster. They're all ancient now, which is so ridiculous. And I remember,
Well,
I mean, yeah, I was younger than the characters when I first watched that, but even then, I watched it thinking this is ridiculous. They're only 30. So I took that idea and sort of ran with it. So they're all dealing with turning 30 in different ways, and Anatole um, clearly is having some issues with that. He hasn't really found a career that he likes. He's just ended up working with his dad, and then his dad's had some health problems.
And he's quite
Uh,
resentful of his father in many ways too. That comes across as that this anger at his dad.
yes, yes. I mean, we don't get to see too much of their old relationship. I like to leave some things sort of unspoken for the reader to imagine in their mind, but I would assume that his my interpretation of it is that his mother died when he was quite young, and he's sort of been raised by his father, who was quite cold and a sort of old fashioned um, what's the word, disciplinarian. He talks about not really ever getting presents as a child and things like that, and there's some sort of lingering resentment there that he's turned into a kind of fairly unique worldview, um, where he looks at things slightly different from all the others. But yes, there's clearly some unhappiness at the heart of him, um, which leads to his behaviour, which is quite Machiavellian at times, I suppose.
Oh, yeah, he's definitely, manipulative because he uses his "nobody wants to play this game," and he uses "it's my golden birthday"
Yes.
as his tool for pushing them into doing something they don't want to do. I mean, they could have sat down and played a game of Monopoly. That's what we
Yeah.
do on our birthdays and Christmas. Monopoly, which
Yes.
takes forever and is the game for everyone that no one actually likes playing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, there are many more straightforward activities they could have done. Yeah, I mean, I hope one day a reader gets in touch with me and says that they actually played this game that he's invented for real and tells me how it went, because I'd love to know.
You'll probably read about it in the newspaper.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, yes, it works as an actual game. It could be played. You have to have a very dark sense of humor. Um,
Isn't it
but
Cards for Humanity or something that
Yeah, I guess it's vaguely similar to that. I haven't actually played that. I think I've heard about it, but
but
yes,
somebody who likes to play that would probably enjoy this.
probably, yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, the sort of barrier to this is that it's quite a lot of work actually writing stories. I mean, the one point where the book probably stretches credibility is that they all write these stories within sort of 12 hours, but which obviously because I actually wrote them
You had to
myself and
write them all.
right and spent a lot more time on them than that. So these characters were better writers than me, or at least quicker writers than me. Um, so yeah, I mean that's probably. I mean, but you could have a much more condensed version. You could have a very sort of write one paragraph or something like that
Oh,
about your friends
absolutely.
murdering each other. Yeah,
I mean, that's
if
the thing. These
you wanted to.
stories were incredibly intricate, and it did reach the point where I was having to double check that it wasn't actually happening. And I think that's where the enjoyment lies, is is that point where you are actually having to figure out if this murder is truly occurring or if it's the story that the character wrote.
Yes, I mean that's the mystery. I mean, I call this book a murder mystery. It's not a classic murder mystery. It doesn't have a sort of murder investigation and then solution, but it is
And
definitely
there's
a
no little detective.
no. There's no detective. There's no clues in the sense of sort of a scrap of fabric found near a body or anything like that. But it is definitely a mystery about murder, um, and the mystery is exactly what is real and what is not, or at least that's sort of the primary mystery. So I'm calling it a murder mystery, but a slightly different type of murder mystery.
And of course, it was all typed on an Olivetti. And I have an Olivetti under my desk.
Oh, do you? Oh,
Yes, I
wow.
wrote my first short story on an Olivetti when I was 13.
Oh, wow.
Well, we
Um,
didn't have computers,
no,
so
no.
I am talking about 1987.
Okay. I mean, it's a lovely machine. I remember sort of playing around with them as a kid, but I never actually had to use one as a tool for writing.
We learnt to type on them at school.
Yeah,
That's how
wow.
long ago I went to school. So when people say, "I'm turning 30 and it's really old," I'm thinking, "Yeah, I wish I were turning 30."
No, I know. Me too. Me too.
But
Um,
that I think that's the thing though, isn't it? It's that, with these characters, they are all you're you're confined because the weather is that bad,
mm,
and they're with people who, while they have a seemingly good relationship with them, there are those undercurrents, as we discover, especially with characters like Phoebe and Dean specifically, who are brother and sister-in-law.
mm.
And then you've got characters like, obviously, Anatole, Maya, Janica, and Marcin. Now he's an interesting character because he feels like he's in it so little, yet his impact is massive.
Yeah, I mean, he might be my favorite character. He's probably the one that's most similar to me. He's described as a nihilist, I think, in the first time we meet him, which I'm probably not quite that extreme, but I I do. I've been accused of having a negative outlook, um, and yeah, he's sort of he's he's has a fairly cynical view of humanity, I suppose. But
But that doesn't that come with wealth?
yeah, yeah, um, yeah, it does. I think. Well, I think he just wants a comfortable life and has very little tolerance for anything getting in the way of that. Um, and I mean, he says he's cynical and claims to be a nihilist, but he obviously quite values the friendship of his friends. And I think he's probably sort of a big softy at heart, and he has a sense of humour and starts the book quite stressed and continues quite stressed until the end.
He
But
likes the finer things as well. I mean, he's the wealthy one in the group who
yeah,
made his money through investing.
he works for an investment bank. Yes, and he's got a nice little life in London with a kind of a flat in Greenwich with a view of or no, flat in where it'd be the Isle of Dogs with a view of Greenwich. And yes, I mean, I got to sort of write a kind of aspirational depiction of his life when I was writing that, sort of imagining what my dream flat in London would be and what kind of furniture I would have and things.
Something that you'd get for a few million, because with 1 million you would get a box room and a shower
Yeah.
if you're
Well,
lucky.
yeah, that was another fun thing about revisiting the '90s was to just make the odd sort of
Dig at
joke
how
about.
expensive everything now is.
Yeah, exactly. I think there's a point where no, Dean is looking through what is clearly supposed to be a magazine. Is it called Country Living or Country Life? I forgot what
Yeah,
it's
the
called.
country
One
life
of the
there
two.
was.
Yeah, which used to have.
And of course, Horse and Hound and things like that are very, very popular during that era.
Yes, I remember going to sort of holiday homes as a child and seeing piles of this magazine in these sort of remote houses we were staying at, and yeah, houses, absurdly large houses with tennis courts and swimming pools listed for sort of £300,000 and things like that. Which,
Good luck these days in finding a flat for that with one bedroom.
yeah, exactly.
At least outside of London. If you're looking at inside London, forget it.
Yeah, I know.
Welcome to a small patch of grass in London.
Yes, a garage probably.
Yes, exactly. But that I think that was the thing. It was quite nice revisiting that era because I've got memories of it. I think that when you read further back, the memories get a bit sort of grainy. But finding these characters talking about certain things, obviously Marcin made his money on the stock market and he is an investment banker. But then there's the underside of that, and that is where the secrets start to come out and the characters start, the envy and the anger at each other sort of surface. And I
Mm,
found that interesting, and it was almost as though Anatole had planned that from the start because he had access to most of their secrets. It's like, was
mm.
he the person they confided in, or was he just that, um, a spy that sort of dug through their trash?
um, well, I think they don't hold back from being quite open with each other. When I think he's just been listening the whole time and making mental notes.
And you don't ever think that your friends are gonna turn on you in that way either.
No, no. I mean, they clearly, obviously, know a lot about each other's past and the the less respectable things they've got up to over the years. Um, but they all just assumed that they were in a position of safety, which they are until everything goes wrong due to sort of a string of bad luck.
I think that's the thing. Obviously, the one thing we can talk about, there is a death that occurs before the beginning of the book, and that is Anatole's dad, Gus,
Yeah,
dying in the bath.
dying in the bath. Yes, with the aid of a radio cassette player that was plugged into the wall. Um, and Gus had been ill for a long time. We never find out exactly what that illness was, but it suggested some form of dementia. Um, and it suggested that also, in addition to that, Gus may have not been the nicest person when he was alive and well. So there's a lot of yes, ill will bubbling under the surface there. I think Anatole is probably quite resents having to have become someone looking after his father at this young age, and I think his other friends probably didn't like his father much to begin with. We do get a brief glimpse of. I mean, I won't say what happens because it's quite late in the book, but we do get a brief glimpse of one of the birthday parties they've had the year before when Gus was still around, and
Oh yes,
his presence is not very welcome there.
and
Um,
it's not pleasant either.
no, it's
I
not.
mean, the
It's
undercurrents that are hinted at with his character are very off-putting. I think that's
yes,
the nicest way to put it. Off-putting.
yes, yes, they are. It's yes. I mean, there are dark moments in the book, and that's one of them. But yes, I mean, he's died. He is a human being, so obviously that's tragic in its way, and there are questions about that death. Was it an accident? Did the cassette player fall into the bath? Was he just listening to music and balanced it badly, or was there something more sinister at play there?
Well, it's something
Um,
people did used to do.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it's something I've definitely taken a cassette player into a bathroom with an extension cord, which you should never do, and it's
Oh
really
my
silly to do.
god, really?
Um,
I bet
I've
you
not,
you don't do it anymore.
I've not gone as far as balancing it on the edge of the bath. Don't worry. But no, I've definitely. I remember, when I used to listen to a lot of CDs, have brought the CD player into the bathroom. Which,
Plugged into
yes,
the charger.
there's a reason there are no plug sockets in bathrooms, so don't do that
It
if you're
always
listening at
amazes
home.
me when I speak with a friend of mine in the States and she says, "Why have you got no plugs in the bathroom?" It's like, "Because we don't want to electrocute
Oh,
ourselves."
really? Gosh, I
Because
didn't.
they have, plug sockets for their hair dryers and
Mm.
everything else by the sink, and it's like, "No, thank you."
Yeah, I mean, well, I mean, one of the themes of the book, which again is quite a dark theme. I mean, the book has some fun with it, but it inherently is quite dark. Is just how vulnerable you are, being a human being inside a human body, and uh, potentially, subject to death in all these strange ways, such as with a cassette player in a bath, and many other ways that crop up in the course of the novel. But I
Yeah.
mean,
I
that's
think
yeah,
that's the thing though, isn't it? His death is what opens everything up because Anatole is angry, he's frustrated, He's got to sell his home. He's even makes a point of saying, "This is gonna be the last party we have here, and the only reason you were friends with me is because I had this house," and
Yeah.
everything else. So he's really angry at that point, and I think that is for me, that was the Kickstarter for the game and the reason behind it.
Yes, it's definitely the first sort of domino that sets off the whole chain reaction. I suppose, regardless of how you feel about your parents, their death will always be a very disruptive event. And yes, certainly for Anatole, it leaves him, well, I would say with mixed feelings. Clearly, he found his father a bit oppressive, but also he's completely sort of lost with the change of circumstances. If nothing else, doesn't quite know how to deal with it.
There's an element of guilt maybe for the resentment he feels.
Yes, which I think is very understandable. I think, well, it's quite common for death, tragic situations to always have a sort of layer of guilt for anyone that they touch.
Especially if there's that moment of, "It's over," relief.
Mm.
It's like, "Oh, I shouldn't be feeling relief."
No,
Especially if you've been
absolutely.
the carer, and I think that I mean, that in itself is a really tough job.
Yeah.
Speaking from experience, it is a very, very tough job to care for someone and see their health decline. So, it was something that really spoke to me with his character. I didn't find him completely sympathetic, and I don't think you're meant to. But I did sit there thinking, "Oh, that's really sad, actually." I can understand where he's coming from in that moment. Doesn't excuse his, behavior and everything else, but it is understandable.
Yes. Yes. When you stand back and look at it, he's had quite he's been dealt quite a bad hand. Um, and yeah, I think, I mean, I didn't really depict him as a sympathetic character, because he has to play this role of being the antagonist.
Yeah, definitely.
I, yes, I mean, I liked it to sort of be there unspoken. Yes, I mean, he does say at one point, there's a brief allusion to him hitting a deer with his car and having to finish it with a knife, because it's severely injured. And um, he does say, just because I'm not sentimental about it doesn't make me a monster, which I think is kind of his character in a nutshell. Yeah, he's not sentimental, and he's not depicted that way, but there clearly is a sort of a reasonable human being at the heart of him.
Yeah, I think that he's one of those characters that has so many facets. You can see
Yeah.
that he is angry, he is frustrated, there's almost that feeling that he feels as though he's been used,
Mm.
and I think that is partly the grief, but then you've got his friends saying, "Have you been to your father's grave? Why? He's dead."
Yes. I mean, he was probably the most fun character to write. I just really enjoyed exploring these kind of sort of unconventional views on things that he has. I mean, he doesn't go to his father's grave because he is not religious, and he doesn't believe that his father is there, or watching, or anything along those lines. And therefore, he doesn't see much purpose in going to his father's grave, which is not a completely outlandish way of looking at things when you think about it, but it's kind of unusual. Um, and it was fun to.
I think that's it though. My grandmother passed back in 2008 and my father passed in 85 and neither of them have got graves. So you
Oh,
can't go and
really?
visit them.
Yeah.
They
No,
were
of course.
scattered to the wind. So there is nowhere to go to mourn them. They've got no gravestone or gravesite. So it's just a case of they're everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm not a big person, not a big fan of visiting graves myself. I kind of don't know what to do when I get there, and sort of talking to gravestones is something that I find upsetting and depressing. So I wouldn't do that
I
myself.
think the
But
only things we did when I was a kid at school, we used to do brass rubbing on gravestones.
right, yeah.
Because we've got, a 12th or 13th century church in the village that I grew up in, so
Okay.
they had a lot of very old graves.
Yeah.
So we used to go brass rubbing at them, and that was a school assignment. But that was the only time we ever sort of spent time in a graveyard.
Yeah, I mean, they are strange places, graveyards. They're kind of, they're inherently very somber and serious. But when you sort of go there, you do sort of think like, well, don't really know what to do now I'm here. Or at least I think like that sometimes. So, I mean, I took these feelings that I had and I made them extreme and I put them in Anatole. So he's just sort of entirely indifferent to his father's grave, and points out that there's no, because his father's only died 5 weeks earlier, so there's no gravestone, and he basically says, well, it's just a big pile of mud at this point. So
And he's proved right when
he is, yeah. I mean, yes, it's literally true. He's fairly unsentimental, but as he says, that doesn't make him a monster. He's just sort of a different outlook.
okay, so all of these characters are very, very different. And you said that you put a bit of yourself in each of them, but I'm guessing those are different qualities you're assigning. So it's not every single one is exactly the same as me.
Yes, no. The characters, yes. I mean, so as I say, they started as life as characters borrowed from friends, and then I mixed into that elements of myself, some of my own opinions and experiences and thoughts, obviously made much more extreme, to make them slightly more entertaining and larger than life. And then I'm fairly brutal with my characters because I write generally plot driven books. So if I need a character to change so that they'll do something I want them to do, um, to fit the plot, then I'll just sort of lop off a bit of their personality, or twist a bit of their personality here and there, and make them behave in a way that is more fitting with what I want the plot to be. So I mean, they ended up very different from their origins. So if you know Friends, or if you know me, then you probably maybe won't see those origins there. But that is how they started.
But then that makes them unique because while they had that, as you said, their inspiration was this group of people living in an apartment and in very, very close quarters, these people are still in close quarters and they are confined due to the fact that the weather is horrific and they are to a degree in the middle of nowhere. They're not close to a train station or anything else. So massive kudos to Janica for walking from the train station. Um, I mean, that was like, really? She walked that because it sounded like quite a long journey. And so
Yeah.
they have to be, I think if they were all the same character, they all had the same characteristics, they'd probably get on a lot less well than they do.
Yes, I mean, funnily, that Janica doing that walk, that is exactly an example of something that's taken from me, because that is exactly the kind of thing I'd do if I called someone for a lift, back in the 90s when you did such things from a payphone, and they said, "Oh, I'll be there in half an hour," right? I'm exactly the sort of person that would say, "Oh, I'll just walk," and walk for longer than half an hour through the fields, but I don't like waiting around.
Yeah, but
Um,
she's also isn't she also dragging a suitcase with her?
She is dragging a suitcase, yes. I mean, maybe I wouldn't do that. But again, that's what I mean by making it more extreme version of me. But
Yeah, because 'cause she'd just been on a long haul flight, got back from the airport, didn't even go home, and went straight there.
mm, yes, I know. But Tisbury train station is actually one of the few real life locations in the book, and if you ever go there, you'll see why you wouldn't want to spend half an hour
Oh, is it
waiting for a
creepy?
taxi. Well, there's just nothing there. It's a tiny single platform train station. It's a bit of track where both trains going in different directions use the same track. So if one's going one way and one's going another way, they have to pull into a kind of train lay-by and wait for the other one to pass. So it's really very sort of rural station with a single platform, but happens to be on a main line from London, which is why I chose that location for exactly that reason. So yes, there's not much to do there. So you wouldn't want to wait around for half an hour. It's not even particularly scenic because the view from the train station is just of the road. So
Lovely.
I thought I could just about make that plausible that she wouldn't want to wait and she'd just want to get on with things, and even with the suitcase.
I mean, she'd had a very long journey to start
Yes.
with, which isn't really made clear until she gets annoyed about it.
Yes, I mean, well, this explains her absence for the first sort of chunk of the book. She's been off to Australia on a work trip. And I mean, Janica was fun to write because she's kind of in a bad mood for the whole book. And it's fun to write people in a bad mood. And
Yeah.
I think this is part of the reason, she, again, she's quite a kind-hearted human being, but she's also just been on a 48-hour or 24-hour flight from Australia, making up a sort of 48-hour journey in total with a layover and a train journey.
And
Um,
she's reached the end of her patience.
exactly, yeah, she's really had enough. And then she had to walk because when she turns up on Sunday morning, Anatole is nowhere to be seen. And that's kind of a mystery in itself, where he's gone. Which is what sort of puts her into the role of detective because she starts out just wanting to know why he stood her up. Um, and then that investigation spirals off into sort of investigating all the other things that are going on.
And that's the thing, there is so much going on, there are so many spinning plates. When you were writing this, did you have I've seen so many people that have kind of like murder boards with post-it notes on them and strings, and I legitimately have seen this in
Yeah.
friends of mine who are writers. They have the little post-it notes, they've got notepads full of handwritten scrawl that makes no sense to anybody but themselves. Is that the method you use for writing, or have you got some kind of organizational system using virtual whiteboards and everything else?
I don't actually do anything like that really. I mean, I do make a lot of notes because I don't have a particularly good memory. So I've got notebooks filled with sort of tiny scribbles. I like to get as much onto one page as I can so that I can look at it all sort of with an overview. So I write very small in very tiny handwriting, which is probably illegible to anyone else. But I've never done anything like post-it notes or cork boards. Um, I don't know. Sort of hesitate to say this, but before I was a writer, I studied maths, and I think I just have a brain that's quite suited to sort of visualizing information internally on its own. I don't know, which I guess is something I was born able to do and is quite lucky. But yes, I tend to do all that kind of planning and visualizing inside my own head. I don't know. I mean, I don't know if there's any advantage to that as opposed to putting it all up on corkboards. Maybe it means I can do it sitting in a coffee shop or something like that. But
Well, I was going to say that's far more practical than
it is,
I've got
yeah,
to just carry 25 notepads because every single one is a different character, and because there are so many threads in this story. It's like, how
yes,
did you keep it all straight, especially if you were doing it all in your head?
yes. I mean, yeah, one thing I really wanted to do with this, I mean, I said earlier that I wanted my friends to actually like each other. So, there is conflict, but it's not sort of immediate conflict. It's not like one of them turns up at the weekend planning to kill one of the others or anything
It
like that.
bubbles under the surface.
Yeah. And another thing I wanted to do was to take sort of a fairly mundane sort of domestic situation and build a mystery out of it. And that really appealed to me because I like the idea that the actual sort of darkness in life is hidden inside the sort of mundane, um, and the prosaic. And so, yeah, I mean, building a mystery out of a fairly sort of straightforward weekend, just featuring a reunion of friends. I mean, I kind of had this vision that the whole thing would be sort of like a jigsaw puzzle, and the different parts would sort of unfold very slowly and very carefully, and would all click together at various moments. And I mean, that was extremely hard to work out. I mean, so to say a bit more about the plot for sort of anyone that hasn't read it, it has these sort of fictional murders. It has murders, and some of them may be fictional and some of them may not be, but they're spread evenly throughout the book. I didn't want to put them all at the end of the book, but chronologically, most of them sort of take place at the end of the weekend. But I didn't want to just have like the end of the book be a string of murder scenes, so I wanted them evenly spaced. So what that meant is I could write this book in any order I wanted, except for chronological order. I had to tell it out of order. I had to tell the story in an unusual chronology.
Yeah.
Um, so working out how to do that and how to make it dramatically effective was very, very hard. And I mean, I did write a lot of notes and sketch out a lot of things, but ultimately it was mainly trial and error that I used to work that out, which took a long time. But yes, I really liked the idea of the whole sort of a fairly ordinary weekend being told like a jigsaw puzzle. So you see a bit of it, and then you see an earlier bit taking place at a different time, and then you don't realize there's sort of a gap in the events, but then later on you go back and fill in that gap, and you realize, oh, that's what's going on there. That's why these two things happened. Um, I mean that for me was the real joy of the book. I really wanted to construct something like that was very precise and jigsaw like. And yeah, I mean, I didn't do the sort of corkboard thing. I mean, I did use Scrivener, which is a piece of software which is
Yeah.
yeah, people may or may not be familiar with it. It's kind of an alternative to Microsoft Word, but it's much easier for writing different chapters in different documents and putting them into different orders. I don't really know how I could have written this book with Microsoft Word, or if I was using a typewriter like the characters in the book. I think it would have been actually impossible. You know,
Tipex. A
tip
lot of
a lot of
Tipex.
Tipex, a whole shop's worth of. I mean, yeah, I changed the orders of chapters so often and messed around with chronology so much that I really needed a laptop to do that. I can't really imagine having done it any other way.
When you think that Agatha Christie would have written hers on a typewriter.
I know. Yeah, I mean, I suspect she did a lot of planning. I don't know. I don't know if that's true or not. I've never read any
I doubt she
biographies
was a
of her.
Barbara Cartland.
No, I imagine she was very, very precise and carefully planned everything out.
Absolutely. I think the one thing this in a way, the way you're describing it, it sounds very much like the end of Clue.
Oh yes, I mean, I love that film. Yes.
So do I. It's absolute classic.
Yeah.
Uh, and the moment where the butler goes, "Or it could have gone something like this."
Yeah. 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 I mean, that's yeah. I was very young when I first saw that. That may be the thing that made me really interested in slightly unconventional murder mysteries. I mean, the other thing I love, which I watched very young, is Pulp Fiction, which I think is an 18, but I watched it much younger than
Yeah.
18 because,
I think most of Quentin Tarantino's films are 18s.
yeah, I somehow got hold of a video when I was, I don't know, maybe 12. And I mean, I love the way that film comes together as well, all the different stories told in different timelines. I think that's been a big influence on my writing. So I like the idea of doing something like that, but with a sort of fairly ordinary situation that where the dark element, obviously in Pulp Fiction it's very in your face, but and Clue in fact, but with this the kind of dark element builds over time and you don't know quite what's going on until
Which is almost what
yeah.
happens in reality anyway. There are certain
Mm.
elements of a person's character that you don't see until a certain event occurs that tips them over.
Yeah, I mean
Somebody
I
can seem perfectly placid and very, very not a nice person, and then all of a sudden something happens and you see a different side to them that you never would have believed existed in the first place. And I think that's something that is very real about these characters. It only takes one thing, but all of a sudden you're seeing this element, this side to them that you never would have believed existed.
yes, I mean I think it's true that most real murders the victim and perpetrator know each other. Yes, working out how to sort of have a violent incident arise out of what is to begin with a friendship. Yes, that was a lot of fun. Having sort of fairly trivial arguments escalate into fairly substantial incidents.
So you said that this took a long time to write.
Mm,
Your, the 8 detectives came out
mm.
in 2020 during the pandemic.
Yeah,
So is this something that's been simmering since that point?
not quite. I did write a different book as my second book, which I then put on hold. That was quite a departure from Eight Detectives, and I think my publisher wanted something a bit more similar to Eight Detectives. I was very naive about publishing when I signed a 2 book deal, and in my mind, I thought the 2 books could sort of be unrelated and quite different. But yes, they had in mind 2 books where, I mean, it's not a sequel, but it's a kind of a spiritual successor, I suppose.
I mean,
There are
even the
similar,
covers are
yes,
styled quite similarly because you've got
yes,
the gold accents, the red, the white. It's very, very stark, but at the same time says a lot. And
yeah,
both of them have got that aspect to them.
yeah, definitely. They're of a pair. The sort of black font on a white cover, and the gold elements and red circles. Yes, I mean they definitely wanted 2 books that would sort of sit as companion pieces. So I mean, yeah, I'd thought that maybe the one I was going to write would fit that brief, but I was sort of bending reality to fit my what I wanted rather than being realistic about it. So I got, yeah, I spent I don't know, a year and a half on that book and then changed direction. So that, I mean, I actually think I'm going to go back to that book. Maybe not as my next, maybe the one after, but I was very happy with it. But it is a slight departure, which makes a difficult problem from a marketing perspective. So yeah, this one took me about slightly more than 2 years to write, which is longer than my first. And I mean, it was just the sheer amount of trial and error. I mean, it's not that I wrote loads and then threw it away, but I wrote different versions of what exists and tried out different structures and things. It was very hard to work out how this book would work, before it had been written. So I had to sort of write a bit and then sit back and say, is this working? Does it need to be pacier or more dramatic or what have you? So it was a lot of trial and error. So it took about 2 years and a couple of months to write the first draft, or the draft that I submitted to my editor, and then there's the whole editing process, which actually wasn't too painful, but took
Well,
a
that's
while
a
in itself.
positive.
Yes, yes. No, I quite enjoy the editing process. It's quite nice to. I mean, I don't do anything like I don't have beta readers or anything, so I don't really let anyone read anything until I give it to my editor. So it's quite nice to finally get some feedback, and I quite like at the same time just sort of being solitary and writing on my own. But at some point, obviously, you do need input from other people. So yes, the edit process was quite satisfying, not too painful, which was
So
lucky.
is your editor your only sounding board?
My agent, my editor, um, yeah, I mean, I let my girlfriend read before submitting to either of those. Not because not to get whether she likes it or not, because that's not really relevant, but just whether it makes sense. Whether you can actually follow this.
Yeah, that's the thing.
Which,
Reading is such a subjective thing that everybody has, if you don't read that particular genre, or you do, but you like this particular author, it is it's not necessarily going to speak to you.
yeah,
But then you've got others who will just read everything.
yeah. I mean, really, whether any individual person likes this book, it doesn't really matter, even if they're related to me or what or not. So I don't want to put too much pressure on anyone that I know in real life by asking them to read an early version and then
I was going to say, reason for divorce. My wife didn't like my book.
exactly, yeah. So yeah, with this book actually, because I tried so many different arrangements of the chapters, at one point I actually thought, this is driving me mad. What if I just sort of put the chapters in random order and let the reader figure everything out? And I tried this, and I made my girlfriend read a version of the book in this form where the chapters were literally complete, and I felt quite bad about that afterwards, because yes, I think she struggled to make sense of it as anyone would.
That's the thing. I
Um,
mean, it has such a complex timeline because, as you
mm,
said, it's not linear. It doesn't go this date, this date, this date. Even though
yeah,
it is based over that weekend, there are certain parts of it that take place 5 weeks earlier, and it goes to the 31st, and then it goes to the 29th. And it's like, okay. So you have to, as you said, you have to start piecing things together. And it did reach a point where I was making notes.
okay, yeah. I think with this book, by the time you get to the end, you will understand everything. Um, I don't think it's a kind of confusing book in the sense that you'll get to the end and think, I've no idea what just happened. But the journey of getting to the end, there may be moments where you are not 100% sure. I mean, well, the whole point of the book is you're never 100% sure what's real and what's not. There may be moments of sort of questioning along the way, but yes, I think if you stick with it, you'll get to the end, and you'll everything is perfectly explained and actually quite simple. Hopefully, I don't think it's the kind of book where you get to the end and have to Google what happened. So, which
I think I'd have had a tough time doing that.
well, yes, yeah. I mean, at the moment, you wouldn't get any answers, but yeah, I mean, there are some books where you just get to the end and you're like, I didn't understand that. Right, I'm going to have to go read on Wikipedia.
And I like a book that makes you think. And this
Hmm.
definitely made you think, because
Hmm.
there were moments, as you said, where I was thinking, is this real or is this part of the game?
Yeah,
Hang on a second, read the next chapter, and it's like, okay, so was that real? Did that really
yeah.
happen?
I try to write interesting books. I think a lot of authors would consider interesting not a particularly complimentary adjective. If you said their book was interesting, they might think that's a sort of slightly faint praise, but I like interesting books.
It's like
And
when somebody says it's peculiar. I
yeah,
think
right.
peculiar is a good yeah, but I think peculiar itself is a good descriptive word.
Yes, I do too. Yeah. I mean, I like peculiar books and I like interesting books, and that's what I try to write. But
It's
I
all in the
mean,
tone.
they do make you pay slightly more attention, perhaps. The more peculiar they are, or the more unfamiliar they are. But to me, that's a good thing. I mean, obviously, everyone has their own preferences, but
Well, absolutely. This book, I think this book makes you think far more about humanity and your perception of behavior.
hmm. Yeah, I mean, what I'd really like to write is a book that someone feels inspired to read more than once. I think that's really the sign of a good book for me. My favorite books I've read many times. I mean, I know some people just don't do this, but my favorite books I've read sort of three or four times each, and there are some crime novels included in that. I think The Hound of the Baskervilles I must have read three times at least. And it's the kind of book where you can just take it off the shelf once you know the plot and just pick any chapter and just read it, and it's just enjoyable.
Yeah, Evil Under the
Um,
Sun is one of mine.
oh yes, okay, yeah, that's a good one. I mean, that's really yes. I really wanted something that was interesting, and the way the story was told was interesting, and the characters were interesting, and the dialogue was interesting, and there's
Yeah.
something to think about in every aspect of it. That's what I was going for.
Well, I think that you've achieved that. It's not a book where you can sit there and just go, "Oh, right, I'm gonna skim through this and it's gonna be the revelations at the end," because that's not how it happens.
Yeah,
Because of the way it's been written, because the timeline isn't direct. If you read the end of the book, you wouldn't get the end of the book. You would get something that happened after the
yes.
resolution has occurred. And I think that sometimes that's the best way to do it because it tricks people into a false sense of security, and
Mm.
that's always a good thing when you're writing a mystery.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you. I hope I've succeeded. Yes, I do. I also like mysteries where the mystery sort of extends to not knowing really what kind of book you're reading until the end, and that's revealed along with the murderer at the
Yeah,
end.
absolutely. Well, that's always I think that's always good. If you I think the first person that needs to be happy with the product is the person who wrote it, always.
Yes,
Because if you're not happy with something, then you don't really want anybody else to read it anyway. And the fact that you took so long in making this, crafting it to make it flow in the way that it read is a testament to patience. Especially if you were playing around, if you had those chapters. I think Scrivener is a great piece of software for doing that as well, to move things around because you do have that flexibility. And then obviously, I'm guessing here tweaks were made along the way to make sure it flowed to the point where it didn't jar,
yeah,
because that's always important with a book, that flow, the narrative flow is good even when you're changing things to meet a new narrative.
yes. I don't think it's a bad thing, but I'm quite guilty of rewriting things over and over again. So a lot of these chapters, you'll be reading the sort of 10th version of it when you get to the when you read the final book. And I mean, getting the flow, I mean, I sort of wanted the chapters to almost be disjointed in some sense, so that the illusion of whether what you're reading are the stories written by the characters or reality itself. I wanted to sort of make that illusion work by making everything feel like a story written by the characters, which required a sort of certain level of disjointedness. But at the same time, obviously, it had to be a fun reading experience and not be too hard work. So that took a long time. Again, that was just trial and error mostly, and rewriting things over and over again.
It's a unique way of telling a story, though, which is it's always nice to read something that's different from everything else. I think it's important for variety is the spice of life.
Mm.
And I truly believe that, which is why my shelves aren't just filled with one particular genre.
Yeah, I'm the same. Yeah, I mean, I love to read widely and read all sorts of different things. I mean, obviously, I'm a crime writer, but I would say only about at most 20% of the books I read are crime fiction. The minority. So I'm
So,
reading.
what other genres do you like to read when you're not writing?
I read. Well, I primarily probably read literary fiction, but literary fiction is a term is so broad that I mean it encompasses all sorts of different things. I mean, I like anything that's slightly weird.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today to talk about Ink Ribbon Red, which comes out on the 7th of November, which isn't that far away now. I can't
No,
believe we're in November nearly.
yeah, that's correct. Yeah, it was a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you for inviting me.
So, where can people find you and find out more about the book and also about, I'm guessing, new projects that you're going to be working on now? This one's hitting the shelves.
I have a website which is alexpavesi.com, and I have a Twitter account, or X account, sorry, I should say, which is Pavesi_Alex. And that's it for the time being. I don't have any other social media.
I don't blame you. It's
And
a lot to
yeah.
keep up. Thank you so much for joining me. And for anybody who hasn't heard, Ink Ribbon Red comes out on the 7th of November, and it really does have a gorgeous. I love the two tone on the writing cover. It's very old style, I'd say 1930s.
Yeah. Art Deco, maybe.
Yes, exactly. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, that's it for this weekend. Thank you so much for listening. If you like what you hear, why not share it with your friends and family? And please post a star rating on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any of the other podcatchers where you might listen. You can also follow me on Instagram as Being Bookish Pod and on X as Being_Bookish. You can also find these episodes and video content on my YouTube channel, Ray Loves Reading, which can be found using the tag @BeingBookishPod. Or if you prefer to read everything, you can find some spoiler-free reviews and my reading tracker, plus all the links to the podcast on my website, beingbookish.co.uk. I am currently really enjoying a week off work and reading my third book of the last few days, which is Somewhere Beyond the Sea by TJ Klune, so I really want to get back to it. Until next time, this is me saying farewell and a huge thank